Hi all, good evening all on Play Chess.com and streaming to YouTube. We're going to continue this week looking at the Fischer Spassky match of 1972. I hope the board is okay soon. There's a bit of a delay on the stream as usual. Hi all, good evening. Let's mute that. Okay, so game 10. It's a very, very interesting game, game 10. So we got a meaty, juicy, exciting game to look at here. By any standards, I think. So in game 10, Fischer was playing white against Spassky. And he played e4. We have e4. It's a bit refreshing for some changes from c4 that Fischer's been using. Yes, e4, best by test. So Fischer's back to e4 in this game. And we get a really classic opening, the Ruy Lopez, one of the oldest openings in chess history. Spanish priest, named after the Spanish priest, Ruy Lopez. Let's put on like a bitzer here. We'll use Fritz, bit stable, Fritz 13. And so the classic Ruy Lopez, a6, none of this knight f6 business, classic Ruy Lopez, knight f6, castles, bishop e7. It's been described by some as arm wrestling the center, this kind of arm wrestling around e5, white's trying to put pressure on e5, black's parrying it. We see now rook e1, really threatening to win a pawn now. So black kicks the bishop. This is all pretty standard stuff in the Ruy Lopez. And the variation we get soon is characterized as the Breyer variation. We're going to get the Breyer variation because here, and I think Magnus Carlsen has played this move a few times, and also I think it might be a favourite of Peter Zvidler as well, correct me if I'm wrong. So there's some Breyer exponents. It's still a very popular opening. Black in this position plays what may surprise some of you as a surprising move. It's very, very theoretical. It's one of the top 3 moves. Can you guess what black does here? Black to play. Let's just check from a theoretical point of view. If I said the Breyer variation, hopefully maybe some of you know about the Breyer variation. Black to play, what would you play here? It's one of the main theoretical choices. Any ideas? One of Spassky's, I think it's one of Spassky's favourites at the time. Okay, knight b8. The knight goes back. It's unblocking the pawn, of course. The knight can redeploy. You might think, well, it's a waste of time, isn't it? A backward knight move. Why would you want to do that? Well, the means justifies the ends, doesn't it? It's unblocking the pawn. This about maintaining central control. This can help central control. This c pawn can get a bind on that d4 square. Black ready to take on d4. It's a very popular move. In fact, for popularity assessment, knight a5 actually remains the most popular in Livebook. Bit followed by bishop b7, about 6,000 games for knight a5. Bishop b7 about 4,000. Knight b8 approaching 4,000, 3,500. Also rook e8 is quite popular at 1,200. So knight b8 very popular move. We see d4 standard stuff, and the knight redeploying here. Knight bd7, and white playing the main move here, knight bd2. We see bishop b7 exerting an influence on e4, and now we see bishop c2, rook e8, again very well trodden territory. Now here usually white plays knight f1. It's about 2,000 games here in my book. Knight f1. So this kind of means that the knight might go to g3 later, or sometimes e3 sometimes. But f5 and d5 key squares. Okay, that's the usual move. Or a4, trying to weaken maybe the queen side, leaving a slightly targetable pawn. There's also b3. Fischer actually played b4, 60 games, quite rare b4. It has a certain distinct ideas behind it. We see bishop f8, and b4 fixes that a pawn, fixes the b pawn rather. Now a4, so maybe to create a target on the queen side. And also possible, potentially, maybe also knight b3 and to a5 might be interesting at some point. Here now black plays a forcing move, and it's the most popular move still theoretically, to play knight b6, trying to commit this pawn forward, and in doing so it takes that square away a5. If a5 is played, it takes away that square for the knight to go to a5 to harass the bishop. So it's interesting, it's forcing white's options. White usually doesn't play a takes b here. The usual move is actually to play a5, 39 games compared to just 3 here. You might think a takes b looks consistent with some of the things I've said previously, doesn't it? Fix a pawn on the queen side. It's actually the engine's top choice. Let's have a quick look. A takes for rook a5 here. Interesting, hitting that pawn. Apparently white might be from an engine point of view, white's got a small edge here, but I don't know. It's is it really a small edge? This sort of position gets a bit dicey with that pawn, but if it's not dropping off, maybe it's not so bad. So anyway, players with white usually play a5 here, putting the squeeze on the queen side, squishing maybe, as I sometimes call it. Knight bd7, and now we see bishop b2. This bishop wasn't doing much on c1, doesn't really necessarily want to pin that knight later either. This diagonal is very interesting for that bishop, and we see now black playing queen b8, and it looks like many of these classical openings, very solid and very respectable. You know, this position with black, some downside usually of having a solid and respectable position. Sometimes it's not as exciting as you may want it, sometimes not as tactically interesting, a bit passive. But with black, I would imagine, you know, it's good to get a draw with black at this level. So solid and respectable sounds good in principle. We see rook b1 now, and black plays that c5 now, even though it's like white wanted to discourage it. It's played here, c5. We see b takes, which creates some pressure actually on black. This position, some pressure potentially on this diagonal. This diagonal is potentially opening up here after d takes, because white has this move c4 on the cards potentially. He plays actually d takes e5. So we see knight takes e5, knight takes e5, Queen takes e5, c4, opening up that bishop. The black queen goes to quite a logical looking square, goes to f4, seemingly, you know, safeguarding against doubled pawns. If the queen had gone, I think there's other disaster moves for the queen. Here it's just e5. All this is interesting, actually. Doesn't end here. Queen c6 threatens mate, but white with knight f3. It should be okay. This position for white. This position here. In fact, the engine's going for a queen sack. So yes, I don't know. This is very interesting territory, but yeah, no. The queen goes to f4 here. Okay, so they're on queen e6. That might also be plausible as well. And again, if e5, we might still have this idea of queen c6. So again, knight f3, knight h5. This is a very interesting position, actually. Something like this. If there isn't a queen sack. I don't know, if you look at black's king side, sometimes there are possibilities of attacking the black king. Like here, it seems as though there's, yeah, it's possibilities for being dangerous for black. But anyway, yeah, we see queen f4. Let's carry on. Queen f4. Okay. Now this is a very interesting position where it seems, you know, why would white want to give up this bishop? Or maybe try and win material over here. Is that a good enough reason to win that b5 pawn seriously? Is that a good enough reason to give up the dark square bishop, which otherwise looks kind of dangerous? In fact, both of them look kind of dangerous at black's king. If the queen is kicked, let's look at alternatives. Bishop takes f6 was the game move. If the queen's kicked, still pressure. There's pressure on white's king side here, maybe. So like queen h6 might be plausible. And also there's pressure on d2, so this is more effective than usual. This position. It's okay for black. It's just weakened white a bit on the king side. So yeah, Fischer actually he took on f6. Relinquishing the bishop pair. It's quite a major decision to give up the bishop pair here. Do you guys think? Quite a major decision. Okay, so let's look what happened. Queen takes f6. And there's also, the queen is kind of potentially awkwardly placed in the center here, subject to a pin as well. So should white really go chasing like a pawn here in this position, with the queen still sitting there on d1? It looks like a sort of greedy continuation to take on b5 here. Doesn't it give black a little bit of counterplay? Winning this pawn. Now, actually, black did something quite interesting here. He didn't actually recapture. He actually did exploit this pin potential. He played rook ed8. And there's an immediate threat of queen c3 with this, which is kind of getting nasty. Potentially. Now, if Spassky had taken a takes b, And Fischer had been greedy. Let's imagine Fischer being greedy, wanting this extra pawn. Is it a safe enough pawn here? It seems so. If bishop c6, we get a nasty pin. If black wanted to wrench out this pawn, get this pawn back, there's rook b6 with a nasty pin. And if rook takes a5 here, this could get a little bit nasty after e5, hitting the queen. Here. Here. So even if white gives back the pawn, this position, white's got some interesting prospects going on, and he can actually tactically afford knight c4 because of this bishop takes h7 if queen takes, which would block in this bishop. So I think white's pieces are actually potentially quite good here. Maybe knight c4 is possible. White's pieces will be quite good, and there's this a really kind of annoying pin. So I think white's slightly better there. So yeah, but that's the sort of continuation Spassky could have gone into. On bishop a6, not trying to regain the pawn. This is also a little bit interesting. If white's left a pawn up here and going for this pin now, black seems to have active pieces and maybe is getting his pawn back. This is also an interesting continuation. Say like this, or e5. It seems as though without a defensive knight around the king here, it seems as though black's king looks a little bit vulnerable in this position. Can white build up some initiative? Well, possibly. There's some extra pressure that can be put on the king side. But yeah, no, the continuation Spassky shows is not to recapture here. He goes for this rook ed8, this pin. So queen c3 is a nice follow-up continuation. And Fischer guards against queen c3, essentially, in a very good way, the only way. If you try and get out of the pin, say with queen e2, that might not be so hot. Actually, queen e2, not for queen c3, there's knight f3, but no, more specifically, with queen e2, a takes, because this diagonal is quite good. So that's a bit awkward. Then we have two passed pawns kind of thing, and the bishop here. So yeah, queen e2 is not particularly hot, it would seem. Fischer's move is one of the stronger moves in the position, it seems. The way to handle this impending queen c3, exploiting that pin. He played actually queen c1, unpinning. Very important sometimes tactically. You're thinking of pinning as a major tactic, but unpinning is a major tactic as well. If you can unpin things, you're giving them that extra breath of life here. And it's addressing this queen c3 in advance, this possibility now. Queen c3 was actually played, hitting the knight. We see knight f3, so offering this pawn back. What's the idea of offering this pawn back? Well, remember before I echoed that sometimes black's king looks a bit unsafe. He hasn't got a defensive knight on f6, right? It looks a bit without defense at the moment. So this is the idea actually, and we're coming up to possibly the most brilliant move of this entire game now. So he's giving back his pawn. Queen takes a5, and it looks as though I think normal mortals would probably just consider doing something about this pawn. It doesn't want to be a pawn down, right, for being a pawn up. Maybe something like b6. It's also the engine choice. Why are we taking? But no, he plays a different move. Now if I ask your white to play, yeah, what would you play in this position? I'll give you 20 seconds. I think, hang on, I think e5 is not on the cards here. Someone's mentioned e5. Black could damage the pawn structure. That would not be too good. Because it's also taking away a potentially attacking knight as well as damaging the pawn structure. In this particular position, I think black stands well in this particular position. Not e5. Not e5. Knight e5, another suggestion on stream. Knight e5. Well, interesting. But after takes, it is a pawn down. And say bishop b3, trying to put pressure on f7. Black has c4 now, as well as two connected passed pawns. Bishop pair. Black is actually better here, it seems. No, I have to play with great precision here. It's not knight e5. Queen f4 is another suggestion. It's great. Got some good suggestions here. Queen f4. Again, a takes b. The thing is with a takes b, it gives black potentially this c4 move. Now here actually, interestingly, c4, there's bishop takes c4. And after b takes, this position might actually help justify the queen f4 suggestion. So I think you get at least 100 points for queen f4. It seems in the spirit of it that I've mentioned, you know, you want to try and guess at black's king. It's in the spirit of it, of things. Yeah, you know, a takes, this variation's a little bit dangerous. Maybe black can try and defend, but yeah, you know, you're onto something interesting there. It might actually be slightly better for white in this position, apparently. But it wasn't queen f4. It was the move bishop b3. So you'll notice that black hasn't got time for c4 here. He hasn't played a takes yet, but he does play a takes now. So it's officially become a gambit position. White's actually now, from being a pawn up, is actually a pawn down. So it was mysterious. It was as if Fischer had been playing earlier than this in an entirely materialistic manner. If we just abstract from what we've just observed, Fischer had seemingly placed the rook on b1 and given up his dark square bishop. It seemed he had done this to win a pawn on the queen side. But instead of maintaining even material equality, he turns it straight into a gambit. We've gone from seemingly having the motive of trying to win a pawn to trying to play a gambit in just the space of a few moves. What's the meaning of this gambit continuation? In fact, we have a transposition of ideas. Those that said queen f4, actually you've got a point. One of the sensitive points in black's position is f7 and also h7, but queen f4 is actually played now. So actually, you know, guys, I think we're leading to the dangerous position I said anyway. So queen f4, bishop b3 may be interchangeable. I'm not entirely sure if there's any major advantage. We're getting the same effect. We're getting this pressure on f7. I'm not entirely sure the move order is critical. for queen f4 as opposed to bishop b3. Just for a moment before we carry on white's kingside creative idea for the gambit, let's call it the gambit. If white hadn't gambited and tried to just have the other option of maintaining material pawn equality with 5 pawns each, say b6, this is probably an interesting move as well, because we still might have this on the cards and this to hit f7. That actually seems, you know, maybe here, okay, queen f4. So with c4 without this bishop b3. So he's given, he's sacrificed the pawn to let some coordination basically occur more naturally on f7 in effect, because otherwise, you know, c4 would throw a wrench in the works. Okay, so the gambit in effect here by Fischer, forget b6, the gambit is about coordination actually on f7. It's like back to basics. It's like primary school. In primary school chess, if you remember, well, when I was doing chess at primary school, f7 was the primary target. You used to play these endless go pianos, and f7 was the primary target in primary school chess. It seems to be the primary target here. f7. So the whole point of the gambit seems to be this coordination on f7. It's a sensitive point. It's a sensitive point. It's not defended by any piece at the moment. So a takes queen f4. So the first thing to note, this blocking move, we get that variation we've just seen actually. Black actually played rook d7 to try and defend f7. But on c4 we get the variation we've just seen. Bishop takes with that pin. Pawn takes, rook takes is a little bit dangerous. This position here. There's limited defensive options with a rook on the 7th. The engine suggestion for defending this position, f6, e5, slightly favouring white. Whoops, pardon me. Queen d5. This looks like an ingenious, because white is threatening to just smash black up. Queen d5, hitting the rook. So here, f takes. We're defending f7 if knight takes. This is okay for black, apparently. But anyway, there might be a defense there with c4. It's actually given us the top engine move, c4. So I don't know if Spassky's move is somehow less accurate. It seems entirely logical to avoid the possibility of rook coming to the 7th. So rook d7, defending f7 like this. But it really does become a focal point. Rook d7 is asking for a tempo gain. The queen all eyeing e1 is protected at the moment, so this is possible, knight e5, to get this tempo gain, and it's played. Sorry, pardon me, knight e5. It's played. And it starts to look a little bit dangerous. There are very limited move options for black. In fact, I think this is an only move now. You can't allow f7 to drop. That would be just total disaster. In fact, this is like mating, isn't it? Knight g6 here. Like mating. So yeah, the only move for black to defend this is pin that knight. And it also serves to reinforce the defense of f7. It's the only move. But seemingly sufficient for the moment. But now white puts more pressure on black, and indirectly f7 here. So we've got 3 pieces on f7, right? How does white put more pressure on f7? White's play here. What would you play with white in this position? You want to put more pressure on f7. How would you do it? or how was it done, if you've happened to have memorised the games or know this game in particular. Whites play here. In fact, might be one of the only moves. We've got a very nasty pin actually on the knight here. So Danny G on stream mentioned queen f5. The thing is, this very nasty pin, although it's an unpinning move, rook e7. What does white do here? What does white actually do in this position? If he retreats the knight, I think c4, blunting the bishop, and this starts to get completely lost for white, this position. You could say this is starting to be completely lost. White's just getting pushed around. If knight d4 to defend the bishop, rook e5, and these two connected passed pawns are rolling down the board. Maybe bishop d6, and black's position is really liberated. It's not getting anywhere after queen f5, I'm afraid. It seems, it transpired, queen f5 is not good enough. It in fact gives black the advantage, queen f5. And two people have mentioned that. So Danny G, you're not alone. So Cosmoston, queen f5. Can I convince you guys queen f5 is insufficient? Because of this, it seems as though this move rook e7, getting out of the threat, putting pressure. If the knight has to go back, because f4, well, c4 again. The thing is, black's got the two connected passed pawns. The bishop goes back. Things get nasty. Bishop c8. Things are getting nasty here. This is bad news. So yeah, check. You can see whites can get potentially stuffed in this position. That knight's actually a major tactical liability. So yeah. So many of you have said in this position to put more pressure on f7 here. Which rook? Some of you have been sneaky. You've said rook d1. Hang on a sec. Which rook? B rook or D rook? You got a rook B d1 or rook E d1? You have to choose. Well, I assume you guys mean the B rook, because if the E rook, this is just weaker. So rook e7 actually, this is a liability. So yes, the only rook to use, it seems, you're going to keep support of the e4 pawn. So you want to use your B rook. And we see the move rook e7. Now, okay, so in the game rook e7 was played. If rook, let's just play it, another move, rook a d8. Say that was played. White might be okay here with an advantage with bishop takes f7. Rook takes. Queen takes. Queen takes. Knight takes. This position might be an advantage for whites because rook takes. Rook takes. And it's the exchange up for white. Black has these seemingly dangerous two connected passed pawns. King takes f7 here, there's rook d7 check. But I think white's okay here. Just about. So anyway, yeah. So yeah, rook in this position, rook e7 was played. The rook wasn't supported with rook a d8. Instead, we see rook e7. But in fact, a very similar idea to the pattern we've just seen is played with this bishop being a potential loose piece. That property has been exposed. Bishop takes f7 was played here. In any case, forcing basically black to take. Yeah, if he can't ever do that because knight g6 is like a mate in 2. So yeah, black's basically compelled to take that, and we see queen takes f7, and has Fischer taken a slight risk, because although the exchange up, this is an improved version on the variation we just saw, because black, as well as the 2 connected passed pawns, and black in this position has that rook still. Black played bishop takes e4 here. So getting a centre pawn there as well. If he took on f7 here, it's a little bit dangerous with the 2 connected passed pawns, but it seems as though they can be put under lock and key sufficiently. So bishop takes e4 is a good move, actually, as a preliminary. That was what was played. And now taking here. There's some controversy about this. It's as if, well, does black have sufficient resources to hold a draw? If I ask that question, does black have sufficient compensation to hold a draw? What would be the straw poll here? In fact, let me do it literally. I haven't tried this before. I can do a straw poll at this point in the game. I don't know if it's worth it. Does black have sufficient compensation for the exchange? Yes, no, maybe. A little straw poll. I should stop mucking around. No. Yes. Oh, you're maybe you're all pretty divided, actually. There's only a few people on PlayChess. I would say the link. Actually, I can't put links on PlayChess, so. Okay. So you're a bit undecided by this position, yes. You see, some people have argued it's kind of, maybe Spassky deliberately gone into this variation because he has, what appear to be 2 potentially dangerous connected passed pawns, and yeah, the engine view on this position, by the way, is it's only like half a pawn up for white technically. Okay, so black's only got a pawn for the exchange, but yeah, it's interesting. Actually, so the majority of you seem 6 votes. You say yes. Okay. Okay, let's see what happened. We see white playing rook d7 check. The king goes to f6 and the rook gets behind the pawn. That seems to be a perfectly logical operation to get behind that b pawn at the moment. And yet technically, by the way, the engine evaluation has just evaporated to 0.25. So in fact, okay, even though it seems totally sensible, I mean seriously, this seems totally a sensible thing, maybe there was something even stronger here for white, in this position here, not to get behind the pawn, but to play king f1. Maybe that gets the king nearer to in front of the pawns, and if the check, king here. Okay, so let's just bear that in mind. Rook b7 here. You see, this allows the king to be kicked to the corner. Slight little nuance, you see, getting behind this pawn. This is approaching move 40, maybe some time pressure or something, but technically it seems, you know, the king is kicked away from this territory around here to get around here. It's kicked away. It's kicked to h2. And not only that, on h2 it can be checked. So we get this position. And now, okay, what to do about the pawn? There's only one thing, it seems, or could you counterattack here? Do you have to protect the pawn, or could you counterattack? Well, b4 was played. Now Fischer played king g2. So for the moment they seem frozen, right? b3 stopped, c4 stopped. They're frozen by the rooks. So we seem to move king g2. Right, now here it seems it does seem as though black has a certain resource which he didn't play. He played actually h5, and the evaluation goes up for white again. Now if he plays bishop e5, this might be a little bit trickier, just technically, with the idea of bishop d4. It's a very centralized bishop. So say g4, bishop d4. How exactly would black be broken down? Not only a centralized bishop supporting c5, but also potentially hitting f2. A bit of coordination going on. How does black get broken down here, in fact? Interesting. It's interesting because this is less than half pawn advantage. If black reaches this position, it's almost a bit fortressy, isn't it? This position here. He didn't play this. This might have been a good opportunity to have tried to hold the draw. Don't know what you guys think. Do you think this is easy to crack? Easy nut to crack? Yeah? Is it? I wouldn't have thought so. So anyway, no, he played actually h5. And now in fact this whole bishop e5 can actually be stopped with f4, it seems, but white didn't play that. So white actually played rook b6, though that does actually stop bishop e5, of course. It's pinning the bishop now. So white is back in more of a driving seat here. But even so, after rook d1, how do we crack this nut? The king now comes to f3. Spassky plays what is seemingly a logical move at move 40. He unpins that bishop with king f7. Might be a slight inaccuracy though. Here it seems the move rook d5 is a bit more fortressy. If that's an adjective, I'm going to start using it. A bit more fortressy, maybe. Say king e3, trying to maybe get over opportunity g5. This position is a little bit fortressy. In fact, the rook is holding h5 from d5. It's holding d6. How does white actually break in here? Might be tricky. Okay, so in the game, actually, after king f3, we see king f7. And now, it seems as though white's getting a distinct, clear advantage from an engine point of view, more than a pawn, after this king f7. It seems now, after king e2, black's feeling a little bit of pressure here after king e2. The rook does go to d5, but now we see f4. And it's slightly different, it's slightly more in white's favour, marking that e5 pawn. It's almost as if black's approaching a Zugzwang meltdown in this particular position. This position here, with these pawns like this, is more, if I'm using the term fortressy for one side, more Zugzwangy for white, isn't it? This position. It's more Zugzwangy for white. To approach Zugzwang for black. This position here is more uncomfortable for black than what we've just seen. If black had in fact not played h5, sorry, king f7, if black had played this, and say we had, instead of king e3 here, we can have king f5 here to stop f4. If the rook went back, c4, danger level, pawns are liberating. So a slight improvement here. This is a slight improvement. You know, that's keeping black quite aggressive, potentially, putting more pressure on the potential for the passed pawns. This continuation, but anyway, so this was a little bit maybe, you know, passive. This king f7, it's giving white this opportunity to have this position now. So we have g6, and this probably doesn't help much either. It's getting a little bit difficult. If king f6, g4, we're using this majority here of pawns. F takes. This is starting to be difficult for black. This position. There seems to be a squeeze happening on the king side. So yeah, things are transforming, but this is very difficult now for black. So he played g6. Things are transforming. White plays g4. He's gaining space on the king side. H takes, and there seems to be less of a probability of these pawns ever liberating with c4 as a result of the f5 square being taken away from the black king to stop this stuff. It seems c4, the stranglehold on black playing c4, has been really suppressed because of this king side squeeze. So Fischer's using a restraint strategy on these connected passed pawns, making use of his pawn majority on the king side to keep out key squares like f5, keeping this lock and key on the liberating c4, which otherwise would be quite dangerous. Two connected passed pawns, the bishop supporting b4 there, but the pawns here now seem fairly frozen down. They seem fairly frozen. And not only that, because they're frozen, also black's pieces are also a bit stuck to each other. They're a bit welded to each other. So we're approaching a position where black might be more susceptible to some sort of Zugzwang. Black played here. This is starting to be a very difficult position now. What does black actually play here on move 44? He can't actually move his rook anywhere now. His rook's actually constrained as well. It's not just the pawns which have been constrained. It seems basically the two pieces have also been severely restricted. If the rook can't move here and it can't move over here either, can the bishop move? Say bishop e7? Not really. Rook b7, bang. So actually it's the pawns, the disease has spread. It's not just the pawns being frozen down. It's like the pieces have been frozen down as well. You might suggest, well, hold on, bishop c7? Bishop c7 actually might be playable just about. might just be playable. But even here, it starts to get tricky, because white can actually get a nice blockade in with rook c4, and now black's in knots in this position, actually losing material. So yeah, it's a tricky position. The blockade on the pawns is like the pieces are being welded together and severely restricted. So black's getting zugzwanged, it seems. He plays g5, trying to get that e5 square, trying to wrestle out that e5 square. Fischer doesn't oblige here. He doesn't actually, well, no, he kind of obliges, but he doesn't take having doubled pawns. He keeps his potential, pawn mobility going here. He gives black the e5 square. He plays f5. The ugly looking fg is also kind of liked, by the way, by the engines. If bishop e5, this position was also tricky for black. But anyway, f5 is great as well. Black hasn't got too many possibilities. He's kind of going into a zugzwang, it seems. Bishop e5. Is it too little, too late? Things have changed a lot since this earlier bishop d4 construction plan. Now we have rook b5. And you might think, well, hold on, isn't bishop d4 here possible? Black actually played king f6. If we have bishop d4 here, it seems white's getting a massive advantage in check in this position, in this particular position, with doubling rooks, actually going for black's king, because yeah, white is threatening things like weaving a mating net around black's king. It's very dangerous. So okay, so we actually see king f6, not bishop d4, but king f6. But it sheds a pawn. It does actually shed a pawn. I don't know what else black could have done here. The engine suggestion is bishop c3. But now, if bishop c3 here, this is dangerous. Black can't really move the rook. He's going to lose the c5 pawn. And if he moves the bishop like to check, then actually the blockade can be reinforced with the king. Finally, this is really unpleasant. If the king gets to c4, then the rooks are kind of freed up and very dangerous. So yeah, black actually shed a pawn, and it's the beginning clearly of the end here, shedding a pawn. Guess what white plays to win a pawn? White wins a pawn here. How? White wins a pawn how? Anyone still awake? In this position after king f6, so how did white win a pawn in the game continuation? Move 47, he won a pawn. How? $500 points if you can get it. Yeah, rook takes b4. Using that pin. If rook c4, that's interesting. Let's have a quick look at that. Bishop d4 might actually be okay for black. He's back to less than half a pawn advantage technically, actually. So no, we'll just win the pawn. No more dreams of two connected passed pawns, if there were any dreams of that. My personal opinion is that Spassky is under far too much pressure. The whole Soviet Russia against the United States backdrop to this match, I think, put enormous psychological pressure, especially on Spassky, to be honest, in my opinion. yeah, he had more accurate defences in this and all the games, but I think there's so much pressure, the undertones of this match. Anyway, he's getting dismantled now, losing this pawn. So we see bishop d4. Yes, check. He's really just the exchange down now. Not only that, you know, white's got a potentially dangerous pass pawn. Potentially. We see king. We see a very nifty move in this position. It looks as though white needs to move the rook now, but he played a cheeky move, king f3. Oh, he left the rook hanging? No. If the rook is taken, then there's rook e6, checkmate, because the king's just taken these two squares, right? So a little cheeky move, very useful. King f3, not really setting a trap. It's a positional move, taking away some squares. We see rook d8, and again, not moving this rook, not bothering to move that rook. Actually, he goes on the attack, attacking that rook. And now attacking it again. Yeah, white's pieces are fully coordinated. Without the two connected pass pawns, it's not so much fun for black. The fun's been taken out of black's position. He's just exchanged down with this single pawn, and white's got this pass pawn here. Rook d6, rook b6, persistently trying to get rooks off. But now rook g6, putting scrutiny on g5 now. Oh dear. But also, no, more importantly than g5, it's just simply maybe to advance this pawn soon, well, at least to f6. We see king d5, and this pawn is taken. If f6, well, it's still winning. I think it's all winning here. Well, rook takes g5 was chosen, so two connected pass pawns for white. It's over, isn't it? Bishop e5. And now f6 is possible because of the pin as well. King d4. And the final move of the game is rook b1. So we look at this final position. It seems Spassky resigned here on move 56. If bishop takes f6, white can win with rook check, as an example. Let's take this, and this position, the king is cut off, and we've got this pawn we can just herd with the king. So that's totally hopeless. So on move 56, yeah, black kind of resigned. Black resigned on move 56 after rook b1. Black resigned. White is threatening rook d1 check. If the rook moves somewhere, again rook d1 check, and we could take on e5. So it's pretty terminal, rook b1. Okay, so my impression of the game, well, this is my limited impression of the game, is okay, so it was a classic Brea Roy Lopez, and it seems to be going okay for black, but then there seems to be a surprising turn of events, forcing turn of events on bishop takes f6, giving up the bishop pair, seemingly to try and win a pawn. But at that moment of either consolidating the pawn or trying to be a pawn up, instead Fischer turns it into a gambit, and all of a sudden f7 is highlighted. You know, the classic f7, back to primary school chess where you used to chase the f7 square. So much pressure was put on f7. The bishop on b3, the queen on f4. Fischer had made sure that c4 wasn't possible. Then we have this tempo gaining knight e5, led to a pin. And then even more pressure was put indirectly on f7 with the rook bd1, and then this Fischer daringly maybe takes some risk, simplifies knowing that black's got 2 connected passed pawns, restrains the pawns. Maybe there's a slight inaccuracy with Fischer's play there. Maybe somewhere where the engine's suggesting he should have played king f1, he allowed this check and his king to go to h2. Maybe there was some probability of Spassky setting up a stronger fortress, but it seems Fischer restrained the pawns and restrained black's pieces, and Fischer used his kingside pawns to help in that restraint, and then black really started falling apart. He shed the pawn and that was it. So it's a very interesting game for restraints of 2 connected passed pawns, because I think in a lot of our games we're faced with, very dangerous passed pawns from the opponents. But maybe a more ambitious thing to bear in mind is not just restraining the opponent's pawns, it's restraining the opponent's pieces as well, trying to force this zugzwang, this massive zugzwang that seemed to happen here to Spassky. So have you got any questions? Anyone got any questions on stream or anywhere? Or should we have I said enough about the game, or do you want a quick run through the game again, fast forward, or any questions, or should we leave it till next week? Spassky was black, yeah. So any questions, or should we see next week? Very interesting game. Okay, all right. Okay, have a good week. See you next week. Okay. Maybe if you've got any comments or questions, leave them on YouTube. It will go on YouTube. YouTube.com kingscrusher. Okay. Until next week. Thanks very much. Comments or questions on YouTube.